Recently appointed collections manager here at Kauffman Museum. Kris began working here in August, and in her role as collections manager, she oversees the care of the museum's collection, prepares new donations for review, meets with possible donors, and identifies objects for possible deaccessioning. Kris has a BA in history and a BS in home economics, both from Bethel College, and an MS in American Public History from Wichita State University. Prior to working at Kauffman Museum, Kris worked in special collections at the Wichita State University Library, also as director at the Mennonite Heritage and Agricultural Museum in Goessel, and for the last 19 years, she was curator and archivist at the Harvey County Historical Museum and Archives. Kris published the book Heritage of Care, The History of the Bethesda Mennonite Hospital Society in 1998. And please help me welcome Kris Schmucker as she presents Revisiting the Voth-Unruh-Fast House, 150 Years of History.
Thank you, Andy. First, I'd like to ask, how many of you are a descendant or have a connection to the Voth-Unruh-Fast house? Feels like I see a lot of cousins, well, several cousins anyway, in the audience. So that's neat. It's good to see that as we talk about the stories. Some of my stories are going to be different because I heard the stories from my grandma and from my great-grandmother, so they will be the stories from my particular family, and so you might have different stories, but that will be interesting to hear maybe a little later on. In 1974, how many of you remember 1974? Some of you do. I was in grade school in the younger years, and I remember it as a very exciting summer. It was the centennial year. And we all were celebrating the migration of the Mennonites coming here to Kansas, the 100 years. And everybody in Goessel was celebrating. As I remember, that was when the museum was started, and we had all kinds of activities. I think it was the second annual threshing days. There were all kinds of exciting things happening. But also happening at that same time that was kind of unique to my family was this house was going to be moved to Bethel College. And it was impressed upon me that this was very important and special, that our great-grandmother's and actually great-great-grandparents' house was going to be moved to be preserved at Bethel College, and that is now known as the Voth-Unruh-Fast house. I remember when my grandma and my parents, we went to watch this great move. We went to the place where it was, which is east of Goessel. I'll give you directions in a bit. And I remember seeing them lifting it up and walking around afterwards and seeing all the rubble and the sod bricks. My dad picked up a bunch of bricks. I remember the stories my grandma was telling me about playing in the lilac bushes with her grandmother, having tea parties and that kind of thing. So it's a good memory for me, and that has stuck with me. Then when I was a senior in college, I needed a senior thesis, and Kris Schmucker was my senior professor in history, and we talked about doing something related to this house and Mennonite architecture. So this house again came to feature prominence in my life, as that was the focus of my senior thesis for Bethel College. One interesting thing that struck me as I was preparing for this is this house also has a migration story, so you can kind of see, take note of that as we go along. This is a painting, as I understand it, by Susan Bartle. That's how the picture is labeled. I just liked it because I like hollyhocks. I'm not necessarily going to focus a whole lot on architecture. That has been my focus before, but I thought it'd be more fun to focus on the people that live there and the stories associated. And that mainly will be the Voth and Unruh family, and there's a lot of interconnected, and the Fast family is the Unruh family. It's just a change in married names. So those are the direct descendants. Actually, before there were any Mennonites, we need to remember that there were also people here. They were the Kaw, the Osage. And although they didn't leave permanent structures for us to remember them necessarily, there is evidence in the Goessel area that there were people here before living in this area. As I said, we don't have their preserved homes, but we should remember that. And with the arrival of the Mennonites in 1874, there was a new vision on how land should be used and divided and all that kind of thing, and that's what we're left with today. This is a story of Alexanderville congregation. They are the ones where this building came from. The Alexanderville congregation came here in 1874 from South Russia, or today's Ukraine. They came as a group and settled as a group here by today's Goessel. And they came at the urging of the Santa Fe. That was one of the main reasons to get more land. And they also came because of religious reasons. They wanted to escape military persecution or conscription in Russia. Once they got to Kansas, I'm hoping most of you kind of know this story. They lived in a communal situation in the immigrant houses that were provided by the railroad. And so can you just kind of imagine, you've just spent a number of weeks on a ship, living all together, and now you're here on the prairie, living all together again. So probably one of your first priorities is to get out and build your own home. And so that's one of the first things they started to do. And so they remembered back, of course you're going to build the kind of buildings and set up the kind of communities that you're used to. So the first communities that they built, they relied on traditional memories. And so I have here two maps. This one is from Rod Ratzliff. This one is the pointer working? This one on this side is from Rod Ratzliff of the Chehufka community in Poland, today's Poland. And you can see the village. It's a village map. And you can see then how they set it up again in Alexanderville in the Molochna colony. They set the villages up like with the houses and then the fields kind of behind it, like that. That was sort of a traditional model that they were used to. And they continued that then here in Kansas, at least at first. So these two maps, if you're familiar with this area, some of you might know where Hochfeld is. It's on K15. You go north past the church. This first map is a map of the original Hochfeld village, and it shows you how along K15 the houses are along the road there, and you can still see the remnants of this. The houses are here, and the fields go out behind the houses like that. And that's how a lot of the farms were essentially first established. That didn't last terribly long because it didn't work out very well with land ownership. So the whole Alexanderville settlement was divided up into sub-settlements, I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word. So Hochfeld was one of the sub-settlements. It's up here, there. And you can see that's the immigrant houses there. And then this is where the church is today. And Goessel is right in this area today. So the Voth-Unruh-Fast house was originally built by Reverend Peter Voth. And you see that red arrow right there? That's where he lived, where he started building his house. This section is the one to remember as we go along talking. So it's from Goessel, you just go over K15. It's in that next mile. There would have been a row of houses there, starting with where Les Gorzen now lives. That farm is still there, and just continuing on east. There would have been a row of houses. The second red arrow, kind of keep that in the back of your mind. That is where Kornelius Unruh moved the Voth-Unruh-Fast house to. He moved it from the David Voth farm, which I'm not very coordinated, from here to there in 1884. We'll talk more about that later, but that kind of gives you an idea of the space. It's not quite a mile, so that gives you maybe an idea of the layout. All the people along that mile are related in some way. Either they're children or like this Jacob Schmidt is the mother of Cornelius Unruh, stepmother of the wife of Reverend Peter Voth. I mean, they're all in some way connected by families. And that's the case in most all the, if you dig down into it, most of them are all familial connections. So, did they build houses that were traditional? Sometimes they did. The very first houses were traditional. This is the house that Reverend Peter Voth did build, and it's a house barn, and I'll show you some pictures from Russia and from Prussia that will look very similar to this. So the first house that Reverend Peter Voth built was this house barn, and it was on where I showed you, and the interior arrangement was very traditional, with all those small room and the attached barn. And who was Peter Voth? He did not live in the Voth-Unruh-Fast house, but he helped build it, and it was his son that lived in it. So he was a minister of the Alexandroville Mennonite Church. This was actually his second migration. He was born in Chehufka, and at the age of 5, he was part of the migration that moved from Chehufka to Alexandroville. His wife was also part of that, was the second made the 2 migrations. So there were some people that had migrated twice as a child and then as adults. At this time when he came here to Kansas, he was 60 years old. So he was starting all over at 60 years old. His wife, Katharina, also came from a very large family, the Peter Unruh family. He was someone that had several wives, and they each had several children. It used to kind of be a joke in Goessel that everybody was in that book. And it pretty much is, it seemed to be very ring true. But so this Katharina Unruh, Peter Voth's wife, is Cornelius Unruh's older sister. They're step siblings. So that is where the family connection comes in. There's 30 years difference, but they're family connections. So that kind of understands why an Unruh landed in a Voth settlement, in a way. I would think that that Cornelius Unruh would have helped build all of those houses along that row, because he was a single man at that time. So this is a picture of houses in South Russia or Ukraine, in Alexandroville. I'm not sure when it was taken. I think it was taken after the Alexandroville group left. More people took their place, but this is one of the few photos I could find of Alexandroville village. So you can see the house barn idea and kind of the similar style and things. And here's some more from Molochna, just drawings and things. And up there's another photo that you can kind of see. You get the idea of the house barn and see the similarities, perhaps. And there's a floor plan there with all those little rooms that each have kind of a specific purpose. And these are then from Poland. There's the house barn, or some people call them the longhouse. This one is actually a museum you can go see. It is in the lower Vistula Valley. It's the Ollendeler Ethnographic Park, and it is well worth the trip if you get to go. There's other buildings there, and they have restored it to be like when the Mennonites lived there. And when I was in Poland, we were driving around, and this is a private home that I took a picture of. I don't know if it's Mennonite or not, but it looks very much like it could have been kept. So you can kind of see, at least to me, that you can see echoes of these homes coming through in the home of Reverend Peter Voth. So So after they had completed their first long house or house barn, Reverend Voth started building another house for his son, David Voth. And this is the house that we're talking about, the Voth-Unruh-Fast house. And it was initially just these 3 rooms. So this is the floor plan for those 3 rooms. It was the kitchen, the bedroom, and this original sitting room. David was his son, and he had a new wife named Marie. And like I said, I can imagine that Kornelius would have helped build this house because he was unmarried and able-bodied, and I'm sure he would have helped. And it had 2 rooms upstairs as well. I couldn't really find out much about David Voth, and people that I've asked don't seem to know much about him. He and his wife were married in 1872, and so they made the migration to Kansas together. They didn't have children, but they had foster children, a Cornelius Weedle and a Katharina Bueller, and a maid by the name of Helena Martin that lived with them in this house. Maria died in 1913, and then he remarried at some point to a lady that was a widowed Hebert lady, and I forgot to write her name down, so I can't bring it up right now. And she had children. So how long they lived in this house, I'm not really sure. He did sell it to Cornelius Unruh in 1884. So, how long did he? There's sort of a vague timeline there that we don't know who was living there and what. So the location of the original timeline, and here I have the super sleuths to thank: Arlen Buller, Les Gorzen, and Brian Stuckey. They went out and they were determined to figure out where the first house barn was, and also where the first site of the Voth-Unruh-Fast house was. So this is on Les Gorzen's place, just east of K-15. And this is what they've determined. And you can have them explain maybe how they determined all this, but through maps and walking around and observation, they think they've discovered. This is where the house barn, the first building I showed you, would have been located. This is where Les lives now. And then this would be the location of the Voth-Unruh-Fast house, the original location. So it's further east of the of both houses now. If you drive past that of Les's place, this is the red barn that you see. It is private property, so don't go bother them. just drive by if you do. And it's been in the family since that time, so it's kind of a unique piece of property. Very nice. So now we'll move on to the Unruhs. As I said, Cornelius bought the house in 1884, so I'm going to give you a little background about him and Anna. Cornelius Unruh was born in Alexandroville, South Russia, in 1843. His father was Peter Unruh, the aforementioned man of many children. He died when Peter Unruh died when Cornelius was only 4 years old, so he never really knew him. His mother remarried Jacob Schmidt, who I think probably took on more of the father role then, and that's how they ended up living with the Voths there. He attended at the village school, and he was baptized by Elder Peter Wadle. He is described as a tall man, over 6'2", and about 180 pounds, with brown eyes and dark hair. In 1874, he, with his brothers and sisters, joined the Alexandroville group and migrated to Kansas on the Cimbria. He was 31 years old, and that always surprised me. I always envisioned him as a younger man, but 31 is actually, seems to me to be, he should be established and have a wife and maybe some kids, but he was still single at that age when he migrated. He's also one that kept a diary that has been used in many different instances. He writes, on the 27th of December at 3 o'clock in the morning, we came to the immigrant houses. Here we stayed 8 weeks. On November 22, 1874, we moved into our house in Marion Township, Section 9. It seems, and then that's the end of the quote. I would guess that he was living with his mother and Jacob Schmidt at that time. In 1878, Kornelius decided he needed to get married. So he asked a Katharina Reimer. But before she gave her his answer, he said, just a minute, I'm going to take you to the land that I've bought. He was feeling very discouraged. This is a story that has been told. He was feeling very discouraged about this land. It wasn't the best. It was hilly, probably a little rocky. It wasn't the greatest farmland. And he wanted to make sure she knew what she was getting into, I guess. So he took her to show her the land and said, this is what I've got. Will you still marry me? And she said yes. So they got married. Unfortunately, she died soon after. She did not live long. I'm not sure. I never quite figured out why, if we can figure out. So once again, he was in need of a wife. He was 36 years old, and he found, I'm not sure what the connection was, because Anna Funk lived in Brudertal, which is out by Hillsboro, which is now under the Marion Reservoir. But somehow they got connected, and she was 22 years old, and she married Cornelius Unruh. She also was from South Russia and migrated in 1874 on the Teutonia, and her family also in the Hillsborough area, the Cornelius Funk family is also a huge family. So there's a lot of connections in that family in Hillsborough with that family. She came with her father, Cornelius Funk, and her mother, Agnetha. Soon after they got here, tragedy struck that family, and one of her brothers died, her adult brothers that was helping her dad, and then like less than a year later, her mother died, leaving her as like the oldest sister to take care of the younger siblings. So this would have, I think, been a very hard time for her. First of all, you just migrated, and then now you have to take care of younger siblings. And your father and remaining brothers are trying to establish this home. So, but in August 1879, she and Cornelius did marry. They lived in a small sod house with a thatched roof that he had built for his first wife. They had 3 children in that first home. I think Anna was a taller woman. When we were going through my grandma's stuff, there were some of her aprons and things, and they drug on the floor on me, so I know I'm not tall, but I think she was taller. And this is her picture on the one side with her youngest daughter, Mary. They had 9 children, and only one that did not reach adulthood. We know some quirky things about Cornelius's personality. He had a thing about pictures. He was determined that nobody should take his picture. He felt that was against the Bible. There was, instructions about not taking a graven image and not having that. And so he made his children even promise that they would not take a picture of him even in the coffin. And now, whenever my grandma told me this story, she'd get a little twinkle in her eye, and she'd say, but there is one picture. This picture, someone got him kind of accidentally while he was working. So we have this one picture of Cornelius Unruh that he probably would not be happy with. But he must have been something of a religious man or serious. He also, another promise he wanted his kids to give him was not to bury him in black clothes, because in Revelations 2:5 it says, he that overcometh the same shall be clothed in white. So he felt he needed to be buried in white. He also gave instructions for a funeral, the text to Reverend P.H. Unruh. He wanted Acts 7:54-60 to be preached, which was on the stoning of Stephen. So those were apparently important to him. Cornelius died. Yes, I read it too, and I was wondering, okay, it's an interesting passage. Cornelius died December 28, 1923, at the age of 80. Anna continued to live in the house with her youngest daughter, Mary, in the picture there, until she died in 1936 at the age of 82. So these are pictures of the house on the Voth-Unruh-Fast, on the Unruh farm. As I said, in 1884, Kornelius bought the house from David or Peter Voth, it's not sure, and they moved the house on rollers with horses from the Voth farm to where I showed you with the arrow, roughly a mile, to Section 3, West Branch Township. And you can kind of get a feel for the hilly nature of the place. Today, it's a beautiful farm with hills, and yeah, today it would be perfect building place. But then as a farmer, looking at it as a strictly farmer, it probably was not all that exciting. I can see where he probably was discouraged because there's gullies and ravines. So the original part of the house is this part, the part without the dormer, the sort of the whiter part. That is the part that comes from 1875, that was moved originally, and where all the children were born and everybody lived in. So you can kind of imagine all 9 children being born in those 3 rooms, with 2 rooms upstairs, and living in there together. It's very different than how we live today. This other part was added in 1911 by one of their sons, Dan Unruh, and it was added, I almost think, more as a parlor room. It seemed to me, the way my grandma talked about it, that was used on Christmas days and Easters and that kind of thing for special occasions. So I wonder if they even used it as living space, but I'm not sure. Some other cousins might know more than I do. But several of the memories that I have read, including what my grandma described, was Christmases were a big deal, that they would be in that room there, and the floor would just be covered with peanuts shells, because that was so very important to that family. Even in her later years, my grandma still made sure we always had peanuts at Christmas, so that was a big deal. And the idea of saying your piece, she remembered going to Anna Funk Unruh and saying her piece to her grandmother at that time. That's traditions maybe sort of dying out. I don't know if I said that the addition was built by Dan Unruh, who was the son. He was a well-known builder in the Goessel community. He built, he did the remodel on the Alexanderville Mennonite Church, and he also built the Goessel Mennonite Church. He built lots of barns, and he built other houses as well. And this is the floor plan of the new addition. This one puzzling thing to me is this 1911 time period. During that time, a lot of people were moving out of their older homes, like the first part of the 1875 part, and they were building nicer homes. They were building what we would call the Victorian farmhouse homes in Goessel. I suppose I haven't studied Inman or other areas, but I would imagine that same trend would be going. So in Goessel, you have a lot of these homes being built in 1910 to 1920. And Dan was actually a builder for a lot of those homes. So why the Unruhs decided just to add a room and not tear this down and build a nicer house, I don't know. You wonder, was Kornelius stuck in the ways and said, no, we're just going to stay here and be simple? Or were they not as wealthy? Or, you wonder why they decided to just stay in that house and not build a newer home. I'm also going to point out the Russian oven. That was part of the original, the original 1875 part that I did not mention before. So this is just another close-up, another view. These are about all the pictures I could find of it in place where it was. One other memory from my grandma, who was Elsie Schmidt Fleming, if anybody wants to know. She remembered as a young girl, Kornelius, towards the end, he was bedridden. And one of her things that he liked her to do when she would come visit. He would want her to come sing to him. So if you remember that bedroom section, he would be in there in bed, and there would be a pulley system, and he would pull himself up in bed, and she would sing to him. And she said one of his favorites was "So Take My Hand," and she would sing him in German, of course. So that was one of the memories she's passed on. And I looked, and there are actually hooks still up there. Now, whether they're the same hooks, I don't know, but there are 2 hooks up there. And this would be the summer kitchen, and it's not attached. It's and you can see the cistern and all that. Yeah. And so this is Isaac B. and Agnetha Unruh-Fast, the next owners, people that lived in the house. So after the death of Kornelius, they moved into the house to help with Anna and Mary. And they brought with them the sound of children again. This is when we have Menno and Martha and Selma that moved into the house to live. So I think that must have been a happy time to have children in the house again. And over the years, the house provided temporary housing for various of the Unruh siblings. Henry F. and Susie Hebert Unruh lived there temporarily with their family, as did Bill and Helena Unruh-Patrick and their family, like when they were moving between houses or whatever. They would live in there for a short time. After World War II, the Fasts built a new house, which is still there. But Agnetha could not see tearing down a perfectly good house, so the house remained. And then in 1974, we had all this interest in the immigrant experience. And Cornelius Kron somehow learned about this house and another one in Goessel, and he became interested in preserving these houses. So there was effort to move this house to Newton. This is a quote from Ernie Unruh, who was the one who moved the house. He said, "Moving this house presented many problems. The foundation was adobe stone with no crawl space. He estimated that the adobe sod wall weighed about 180,000 pounds. He was less worried about it falling apart than he was about getting enough wheels under it to carry its weight." So it was a very heavy house. The other problem was, and John Fast can speak more to this because he was there. You can see how close it was to the 1950 house. John told me you could go like this and touch both houses. So you can see how tricky that was, and maybe in a bit he can explain how they solved that problem when we're done. But these pictures are from John that he took. He was a young high school guy and helping his dad with this. And these are more John's photos of moving the house onto the road. So you can kind of see how tricky that must have been, all those trees and then moving it there. And if I remember right, this is parking at K15, the corner of K15. I think this is on the Kauffman Museum lot already. I got these kind of backwards. And this is on K15, and I don't know if I can, there was some issue with needing a flagman to alert drivers that there was an extra wide load, and that seemed to be John's responsibility to do that. When he saw a car coming, he had to go flag something down. You might ask him about that. He could tell you better. There was also an issue with getting it over the interstate. They had to go around and over because you couldn't go under. So there were a lot of and challenges to be faced. And I understand this was only the second house that Ernie Unruh had ever moved. So there was some creativity that was used, I believe. Oops. And these are just some newspaper clippings. You can see how rough a condition it was in. This is Kornelius Kron and Ernie Unruh, I believe. Yeah. And here it is on site. Again, how much work needed to be done. And so now the Voth-Unruh-Fast house has a new life. It's the backdrop for lots of fun things. There's family gatherings, sometimes that have happened here in the past. There's also people go to see it. It's also, this is from Gary Park, another cousin. School groups get to go and see it. And probably most interesting or fun is on Kansas Day. There's lots of activities in there. So the Sound of Children, again, are in the house, using it that way. So, and this is the house a few years ago. I'll just list the children of Kornelius and Anna Funk Unruh, so you kind of know who they are or were. You have Anna, which is and she married Heinrich Harms. Helena, who married William Patrick. Daniel F. Unruh, who married Lizzie Dirksen. Agnetha, Mrs. I.B. Fast. Cornelius F., who married Sarah Schrader. Heinrich F., who married Susanna Hebert. And then there was Sarah, who died. Katharina, who married, this is P.J. Schmidt, who was my great-grandmother. And then there's Mary, who never married. So that's sort of the stories that I had for you about my family and the relationship to the house. I'm sure there's other people that have more stories. There's also, you may have noticed that there is a need, as with any old house, any old structure, there's always a need for maintenance and upkeep, and there's special needs that come with having an old building. Preservation of old houses is always ongoing. Paint is desperately needed right now. And it's more than just scraping and then painting. There's going to have to be some repairs made, and that has to be done by people that are skilled with working with old buildings and know how to do it right and not just slap it on together. So that is something that we have been working on. We've been meeting, David and Andy and I have met with some contractors to begin the process of how to do this, how to go forward. So I'm going to turn it over to Ann, or maybe I should take questions first, or do I turn it over to you?
Turn it over to me and then.
Okay, I'll turn it over to Andy, and then we'll be.
Thank you.
Yep.
I just love hearing all that. Is that okay if I use this one? I should not touch that. That's what. Oh, I am going to touch it. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So great for me to hear that background. I currently don't spend a lot of time with school groups out there, but have in the past, and nice to know even more details on the history as we take second graders and third graders and fourth graders out there throughout the school year. And I will say that's one of the rotations that we almost always do with schools. When they come, they can pick from a variety, and almost always they choose to go out to the farmstead. As Kris mentioned, caring for an artifact, and especially an artifact as large as the Voth-Unruh-Fast house, takes both funds and staff time. On the chairs today, we have placed a small form to facilitate donating to the museum's farmstead fund. Some of you may have also received an email in the last day or two. And that, as Kris mentioned also, the house needs extensive renovation before we can begin painting. Some of the sills around the windows are completely rotted, so we will replace all the windows. There are 11 that must be replaced. We'll go ahead and probably replace all 15 windows on the house. And after those repairs, of course, which we hope can happen this winter, we have some communications going with some people that do that kind of repair and are attentive to historic details of homes. After those repairs will come the painting, and that would be next spring, summer, or fall, depending on the timing. The entire project will be about $75,000. And we hope you are willing to be a part of the restoration project by using the form on the chair. You can either leave it here today, take it home, send in a check. We have online options. We have just all kinds of options for you to make it easy to help us take care of and really continue to have the Voth-Unruh-Fast house as an active part of the interpretive mission and story of Kauffman Museum. So thank you for anything you can provide to help us take care of that. And I think with that, I'll open it up to questions for Kris. I'll have this to go around, and Kris can come back up here and answer questions. Any questions from the audience or stories?
Yeah, maybe someone wants to add, 'cause I know there are other family members here.
John.
Yeah, John.
Just want to say thank you, Kris, for your work, your dedication, for researching this and going through and putting this together. It's important to keep these stories alive. I'll just share as a volunteer docent. I agree with what Andy said. When we take school children through, I love to walk them in and say, can you find the TV? Can you find the microwave? Can you find the refrigerator? And we begin to very quickly to recognize that life is very different from 150 years ago, and then we can launch into that story. So telling that story of education and keeping children aware of what has changed is very important, and this house is an important step for doing that. Thank you, Kris, very much.
We also get to use it for science. I know sometimes when I've done the program out there, I'll have them do the math in their heads to figure out how old the house is. And of course, if you did the math now, you would know that it's 150 years old. I think we've mentioned that probably here, but 150 years old, 150 years since it was constructed. All right, I'm guessing that people will stay around and be telling stories to each other. Might want to talk to Kris. I know I have a question about one of the pictures. I'll just ask it. So there was a little building in the front right of the picture that had the, I don't know what year, 50s car or something. That one, what year is vintage is that car?
Yeah.
But anyway.
This one?
Oh, no, there's another one even where it looked smaller, like a little building. I wondered if that was the outhouse. That one. Well, I guess it looks bigger from this picture,
Yeah.
so it's probably not an outhouse.
I don't know. John, do you know what that one was for? I don't know.
I was told it was used as a smokehouse, but it was not the outhouse. The outhouse was actually this little white
Oh,
building
yeah,
up
right here.
That was the outhouse.
Oh,
The
there.
front was used for storage, foodstuffs, dry goods, and
Mhm.
things. I think it was the wash house too. And also the wash house, correct?
Mhm. And is this a picture from the back?
That's from the back, looking towards the east.
Okay.
And that looks like a WPA project. Yeah.
I have a question about restoration. When you talked about replacing the windows, how do you keep the original window look?
Yeah.
So you have to have special people building it?
Yeah. And they have to use techniques that would be compatible with what they would have used. And maybe Dave wants to speak more to that, but that's, yeah. You want to use techniques that are to build the window like they would have built it. Go ahead, Dave.
Most of the windows sash, so that they're double hung windows. The sash is a portion that most of those need to be replaced. Many of them are beyond, they take more to repair than to rebuild in the same style. But much of the trim around it will be either repaired and repainted, but it's the window sash that are in need of replacement. Is it glass originally? Some of it is, through time, windows get broken, but maybe a third, probably no more than a third of the panes look original. That have, you can see, because glass is a liquid and you can see the ripples. So where there is original glass, that will be transferred over to the new sash. So the glass will, what is original will be preserved. When it's been replaced, it won't be. So where the original is possible to be restored, repaired, it will remain, and where it isn't, it'll be replaced in the same tradition as the old.
I'm LaDonna Unruh-Fast. My dad, Ernie, moved the house. I was a senior in high school when that happened, and I don't think I realized the value of what was going on at the time. But I do have a memory that he had a parking ticket for parking a house on the side of the road on his way back from Goessel.
I'm curious if anyone knows what year it was moved from the front, because it first sat in the front, and then it was moved back to where it is now. And then a different comment or question.
I wanted to just tag off your comment, LaDonna. We didn't recognize that as high schoolers then. I was kind of cursing myself that I had to keep moving shovels and chains for Dad and for Ernie. But Glenn Ediger, who was a student then, spent the night in that house on the corner to make sure nothing happened to the house. Glenn is still a volunteer who works here with the museum, but Glenn stayed in that house overnight to make sure nothing was molested or damaged or hurt during that time. Yep.
I had a question. I had a question about how, Brian, what do you do to figure out where originally the house was and those kind of things? How do you figure that out?
That's a long story, and you don't want to know. Arlen Buller gave a lot of clues to where it began, and then the final pinpointing was done by dowsing. And so, my question here too, and either one of you could answer that: is this house on the National Register, or are you just voluntarily trying to be as authentic as possible?
No, it's not on the National Register. It's been moved, so that's pretty much out. It's just responsible to take care of it properly. Yeah.
One of the next steps, and to help the house into the future, is one thing on our list is to see if we can put it on the State Historic Register. On the State Historic Register, it's okay if the house has been moved. The National Historic Register, it can't have been moved. So if we get that done, that will take a number of years. But as we do that, then the next time that it needs either painting or repair, there will be more grant possibilities for that. And the other part is that we are hoping to put some storm windows on to preserve the windows. So that's another way that we hope to preserve it, so that the maintenance won't be quite as drastic each time that we need to paint and repair.
As far as determining the original location, Les Gorson is actually the most knowledgeable when it comes to that. And I started asking Les questions, and we started doing some exploration. He shared with me the information he had because he lives on the site. I got curious, and I started watching Google Earth, looking for patterns of grass growth and crop growth, thinking that, if there's been some kind of a disturbance in the soil, many times you can tell that for years in how the crops grow or how something else will come up. And I started watching on Google Earth and got some clues that way. And then last March, Brian Stuckey came out to Les Gorson's house, and we confirmed a lot of the things that we had discovered earlier. But Les Gorson is the one that really has been at the heart of this research.
I'm curious, the paint chip card has a rendition of the house that has shutters on it. Is there, is that the artist's imagination, or is there any historical evidence of shutters? And do any relatives remember shutters? I know there's
Yeah.
evidence of screen windows
Yeah.
from looking at it.
I'm looking at LaDonna, and we're both shaking our heads.
Yeah.
No, to our knowledge, we don't see any documentation of knowledge of shutters on the house,
Yeah.
at least at that location. Maybe at the original location,
Yeah.
possibly, but at the second location, no.
I would agree. Yeah, I don't know where the shutters came from.
Artist license? Artist license?
Yes,
It
yeah.
had shutters? They
Yeah.
wanted shutters? Okay, well, thank you so much, Kris, and I have a few announcements, but let's give a hand to Kris.